I've heard before, and I certainly have experienced that muscles that, for whatever reason, genetics or sports that one played, et cetera, muscles that we find that we can contract to the point of almost a slightly painful contraction seem to grow more readily than muscles that we can't recruit very easily. And the reason I mentioned sports that we played earlier is you just have to watch the Olympics to see that, swimmers obviously are very good at engaging their lats. You look at the gymnasts, they seem to be very good at engaging everything.
Yeah.
And they go through a huge number of different dynamic movements. So that explains that. So I find that, if people say, oh, I can't get stronger in this, or my whatever body part is weak in terms of its inability to engage hypertrophy.
Yeah, I see you're going.
That oftentimes that can be because of an inability to engage those upper motor neurons to deliberately isolate those muscles. Are there ways that people can learn to engage particular muscle groups more effectively over time for sake of hypertrophy or strength, or for cases of trying to overcome injury potential or injury, because imbalances are bad across the board?
Yeah, this is actually very common, and I think everyone has probably gone through this. There's some part that you just can't get going. For me, that was the lats. That was the rhomboids, so my back muscles. For years, I couldn't activate my lats or my rhomboids. These are the muscle groups that connect your shoulder blades. So if you try to squeeze your shoulder blades together, that set of muscles there are called your rhomboids. Your lats, of course, are more vertical and pull you kind of up and down. And no matter how many lat pull downs I did, bent rows, pull-ups, I could never see any development there, no increase in strength. And it took me probably a decade to figure out how the hell to actually get these things on. In fact, if you'd have asked me, even in my college years as a college football player, hey, flex your lats, like show me your lats, you would have seen no movement there. When I was doing a pull-up, in that particular case, the only way I could get the bar to move was by using my biceps, right? So it's a synergistic muscle. It's supposed to be a secondary or tertiary muscle in that movement, but for me, it was primary because of my overstrength in my biceps coupled with my lack of activation in the lats. So you're compensating the same movement. Actually, kind of an easy way to think about this is, imagine doing a bent row. So imagine you're bent over kind of at a 45 degree or a horizontal angle, and you're going to pull a barbell to your belly button, all right? Now, you can actually do that exact same movement with very little back muscle activation by simply flexing your elbows more. And so you think the barbell's going all the way down, it's coming all the way up to touching my belly, and you think you're doing a great back development exercise. When in fact, because of the way that you're executing the movement, you're getting very little back development. And this is a really good example of why someone has done a specific exercise many, many, many times, but yet failed to see development in a muscle group, which goes back to earlier part of our conversation, which is why exercises themselves do not determine the adaptation. It's the execution that matters, right? It's the technique, it's the rep range. All of those are going to determine your actual result. So if anytime you're banging your head against the wall and thinking like, why am I not getting movement here, growth or strength or whatever, it's almost one of those, it's guaranteed to be one of those areas, right? You're probably not getting the muscle groups to activate. In that particular example, just because we're here, try, imagine doing that bent row. Instead of pulling the barbell to your belly, squeeze your shoulder blades together first, as far as they can possibly go, and then bring your elbows up without changing the angle of your elbow. So in other words, without bringing your hand closer to your shoulder. So keep that same angle and come up as high as you possibly can, and then finish out the movement. That's going to guarantee a utilization first of the back muscles and a finishing with the biceps at the end, which is how that movement is supposed to go. So how do you coach into that? Well, it can be a number of things. Whenever I'm diagnosing movement quality, I look for a handful of things. But very first one is awareness. You'd be surprised how many folks, when you just simply tell them that muscle group right there, and maybe you give them a tactical prompt, so you touch it, or you put something against it. This is actually why, sorry, I'm jumping over the place, but this is why things like a belt work very well for actually increasing abdominal strength. So a misconception out there is if you wear like a belt when you're lifting, then the belt kind of does all the work for you and your abs get weaker. That can happen, but the exact opposite can happen as well. So if you take a belt, for example, and you cinch it down really tight, and then you just completely disregard your midsection, you will see a loss of strength in your midsection because now the belt is doing the work. But if you put the belt on just a little bit, kind of tight, to where you get some sensory feedback, and you think about using that belt as a way to activate the core musculature, you will actually see a higher, and if we look at like EMG activation, the core muscles will be activated higher to a greater extent than when the belt is off.
Because of proprioceptive feedback.
100%.
And for those that are wondering what proprioceptive feedback is that there are nerves that extend out to the muscles that control muscle contractions, but then there are sensory inputs from the skin and muscle that go back into the nervous system, and those work in concert, and that feedback is proprioceptive. I think it literally translates to a knowledge of where one's limbs
100%.
are and what's happening on those
in
limbs.
space. Yep.
I've seen, I don't have a training partner, but I've seen in gyms where someone will be training and someone will tap the muscle of the person who's doing the work in order to, this is consensual tapping of other people's muscles, not walking around gym touching people's muscles, please. To provide that proprioceptive feedback so that the person doing the exercises, it becomes more aware of the muscle that they're supposed to be training. And it seems that that's probably an effective practice.
Yeah. I'll give you two examples. I'll go to the back with that pulling movement, but then I'll stay on the belt really quickly. So a very easy example that you can do right now, listening, and I learned this from Brian McKenzie, our mutual friend, right? So if you take your hands and open them up, like you make an L with both your hands, and now take those and put them around your waist, just above your hip bones. Mm-hmm. Now, what I want you to do is press out as hard as you can on your hands with your core. And you can feel a lot of core activation. Most people think core activation is the front of your stomach, right? Your six pack. What you need to do is create a cylinder around your back. So it's the front, it's the side, and it's the back. So if you take your two fingers, point them. Now put them just outside your belly button. Can you move your fingers by just moving your ab muscles? 90% of people can do yes. Same exact thing. Now go to that same position just above what's called your ASIS, so your anterior superior iliac spine, right up that front of your hip bone, right in the front. Can you now move? Great. 50% of people are not going to get any movement there.
Really?
Take your thumb and go right above your PSIS.
My what?
PSIS, posterior superior iliac spine. Right? Now, can you move? Most likely no.
Sort of if I do a mini little back extension.
Don't. Just with your core musculature.
Barely.
Yeah.
Maybe
90% of people can't. If you can't perform that contraction, you can't stabilize your spine. So only way to get stabilization in your spine is then to go through hyperextension. And now that's a compression strategy you're putting on your spine. It's better than rounding your back, like going forward, but overextension is not great either. So you want to be able to flex the musculature in a cylindric fashion so you have control. So if you go back to our very first things and with your hands open and you put them right here, and if you're like, I can't get activation, if you pay attention to your thumb, right? Now just move your thumb. And now you see activation back there, right? Mm-hmm. Boom. Now if you can imagine turning that on just a little bit, and now notice how I can do this, by the way, at the same time I'm talking. If you have to go, we don't have control, right? So you have to be able to separate breath from brace. So now if I can put myself in a position, and Kelly Starrett has always said 20%. Give me 20% activation here, and now I can squat, I can hinge, I can jump. I don't need to be locked down to 100% scream to be able to brace my spine. It's going to be ineffective and wasteful. I want to be here. Well, the belt provides that proprioceptive feedback where I can put it on 20%. And it just is a reminder, if I don't press against the belt slides and falls down a little bit because it's not on super tight. If it's on so dang tight, it's doing the work and I forget. So we just want a little bit of feedback there. Same thing with your upper back. If you're having a difficult time activating those rhomboids or those lats, someone can do a simple thing where they take their finger, put it right between your shoulder blades. And you just tell them things like, hey, squeeze my finger, squeeze my finger. As you're doing your bent row or your pull down, you can touch the lat. You can do just visualization stuff. So just imagine like a 3D rendering of that muscle group, and you're watching that muscle group contract. It's very powerful and very effective to do it. So a touch, a visual, all this stuff can help get people to activate. Outside of simple awareness, typically eccentric overload is a very effective way for activation of a difficult to target muscle.
So the lowering of the bar or the lowering of the weight.
The movement of the weight away from the body is not necessarily always lowering, because that kind of depends on what muscle group you're doing, right?
I misspoke, yeah.
Things like a pull-up. Okay, so if I'm going to do a pull-up and I have poor lat activation, I can still get the pull-up muscle movement executed by contraction of the biceps and things like that. However, to make the movement simpler, I'm going to go all the way to the top. So imagine stepping on a box or something, going all the way to that top of that pull-up position, and starting from there, and I want you to simply lower it under control. And so you're just simply breaking the movement down into smaller pieces that allow you to focus on the execution more. It's going to be great. Eccentrics are great for strength development, very good for hypertrophy, and allow you to focus on control. I'm willing to bet a huge percentage of you out there who've I've never had a sore lat. I've done a lot of pull-ups and things like that. If you do that eccentric only, you'll probably wake up the next day going, oh gosh, I feel it there. And that's a sign, even if you didn't feel it during the workout, but I got a little sore the next day, keep down that path. And then eventually you'll be able to do a concentric, maybe take a break, maybe do an isometric where you just hold that position, and eventually work that into a progression where you can do the concentric, eccentric, and isometric portions and get activation. So that may take you 6 weeks, may take you 6 months, but that's generally a pretty good strategy for learning how to activate a muscle group.
Terrific suggestions. Is it true that eccentric emphasized movements might require a little bit longer recovery, or they lead to more soreness than concentric movements?
Yeah, they typically can, but they're also higher force output. So very good for strength development, but they're going to lead, on average, to more soreness. So more potential for intracellular disruption that is going to be associated with pain. There's not as much, people will like to explain muscle soreness as a result of micro trauma and micro tears in the muscle. And that can happen, but that's not the norm. Most of the time, it is things like disruption of calcium that's going to lead to excessive swelling, excessive pressure, and that's going to be then translated as extreme pain. So that's probably explaining more of muscle soreness than actually micro trauma.
Terrific.